Hello and welcome to Nitrania YouTube channel. You're watching another episode of the Game in a Nutshell series designed for explaining the board game rules. My name is Branislav Berec, and in this video we're going to learn how to play Removal, a game published by Albi. It's a game for 2 to 4 players, plays in about 45 minutes, and the minimum recommended age is 8 years. So let's get started. To set the game up, first, place the game board on the table with the correct side up. This is the side for 3 and a 4-player game, the other side is for a 2-player game. Then take all the polyomino tiles and separate these green ones, place them aside. These green ones are called boxes because they represent boxes. All other tiles are called items. Now take all the items and place them into the bag. Then take 3 random green tiles and place them on these 3 spaces indicated by the green box icon. And then start drawing items from the bag and place 1 random item on each space with this orange box icon. In a 4-player game, place items in each space. In a 3-player game, leave out spaces with the 4-player icon empty, so there is no item here. Finally, place 4 random items here under these spaces. These are called waiting items. In a 2-player game, you would only place 3 items as indicated on the other side of the board. Place these green tiles this side up. The victory points on the back side of the tile must remain secret. This is the round marker. Place it on the round 1 on the game board. These are damage tokens. Create a pile and place it next to the game board. And then each player chooses a color and takes the track board of the chosen color together with the 3 helper cards and the victory point marker, and all players place their victory point markers on the 0 space of the scoring track. Then shuffle these keepsake cards and randomly place 3 of them face up next to the game board. When you play your first game or when you play with younger children, it's recommended to keep them in the box and play without these keepsake cards. Randomly determine the starting player and we're ready to go. In Removal, each player leads a team of workers handling a big removal. Over the course of 3 rounds, players will take items from this mansion, load them onto their trucks and deliver them to the new home. With each delivery, you will score victory points based on the number of items and the rarity of items you deliver to the new home. Then at the end of the 3rd round, the player with the most victory points is the winner. In each round, players take turns, starting with the first player and then continuing clockwise, and on your turn you can perform 1 action. There are 4 types of action. You can pick an item and load it onto your truck, or you can pick an item and then store it. The 3rd type of action is take the item from your storage and load it onto your truck. And the 4th type of action is driving and scoring, which means your truck delivers the items to the new home and you score victory points. The round ends when there are no items remaining on the house board. The board is then refilled with new items and with the waiting items, and then the new round begins. Let's take a quick look at all 4 actions, and we will start with pick and load. With this action you can pick an item from the house board and load it onto your truck. You can only pick an item which is available, which means the item doesn't have any other items underneath. That's indicated with these white arrows. So for example, this item has this item underneath and this one. However, this item only has this one underneath, so when any player picks this item, this one becomes available and any player can pick that item. However, this one is still not available because it has this item underneath it. So after you pick an item which is available, place it onto your truck board, and I will discuss the placement rules in the next chapter. The second available action is pick and store. Again, you have to pick an available item. Let's say we will pick this telescope. However, instead of placing it directly into your truck, you can place it in your storage. This is the area which indicates your storage. At any time during the game, you can have maximum 1 item stored here. And you can use this action to pick a very valuable item which you don't want to place yet, but you will place it later. And that's actually the third type of action, load from storage. With this action you take an item from your storage and place it into your truck, for example, like this. And the fourth type of action is drive and score. When you feel like you have enough items in your truck, you can deliver them to the new home and score victory points for all the items in your truck. Then you will empty your truck. You can come back to the old house and start loading new items. Again, I will describe how you score victory points for your items later in the video. Now, let's take a look at the tile placement rules. When you load items into your truck, at least one square of that tile must be positioned directly on the floor of the truck or on top of any other item. So, for example, you can place it like this. You can also place it like this. You can also place it like this, for example. Or if you place it on top of any other item, you can, for example, place it like this. As you can see, the laws of physics don't really apply in this game. They're quite simplified. At least one square of the new item is on top of any other item, so this is a legal placement. Note that you can flip the tile to any side you want, and you can also freely rotate the tile. Furthermore, if you have any item which may fit into an empty space in your truck, you can do so, as long as the item sits on top of any other item or on the floor of the truck. That means if you have a new item, you cannot simply place it like this, because it doesn't sit on top of any other item, and it also doesn't sit on the floor of the truck. However, you can also place it like this. This is also legal placement. It may seem obvious, but you must fit the entire tile into your truck area. You may not overlap the edges of the truck like this. This is not allowed. There are 5 types of items. These blue ones are standard items without any special rules. These purple items are antiques, and the more antique items you have, the more victory points you score at the end of the game. Green items are boxes. These have certain number of victory points on their backside, but you are not allowed to look at these victory points until the end of the game. These black items are heavy items. At least one square of these items must be on the floor of the truck. So, for example, I can place this item like this, or at least one square of these heavy items must be on top of another heavy item. So I could easily place it like this. And note that even without this item here, I could still place the heavy item on top of another heavy item like this, because at least one square of this new item sits on top of another heavy item. Each heavy item adds additional point when the truck drives off. Then red items are delicate items. These are fragile items. You may gain or even lose victory points for these fragile items or delicate items when the truck drives off. And the reason why you can lose victory points for these delicate items is that they can be damaged when you place other items on top of them. When you place a new item, look at the contact squares. Those are squares which will sit on top of any other item. So in our example, we have 1, 2, 3 contact squares. This square is not a contact one because it basically touches the same item. This square is not sitting on top of another item. When placing this item, for example, we only have these 2 squares as the contact squares contacting items underneath. Now, when more than half of these contact squares sit on top of the delicate item will be damaged. Here we have 3 contact squares, so if at least 2 of these contact squares are on the delicate item, for example like this, then the delicate item will get damaged. There are 2 contact squares sitting on it, and there is only 1 contact square sitting on any other item. If that happens, take the damage token and place it on that delicate item. If we play this item like this, the delicate item is not damaged. When placing this item, again, we have only 2 contact squares and only 1 is on top of the delicate item, which is exactly half of the contact squares, and that's perfectly okay. The delicate item will not be damaged. One last note, the delicate item can only be damaged when other items are placed on top of it. When you have a situation like this and you place a delicate item into this empty space here, it doesn't get damaged. And by the way, delicate items may never damage other delicate items. That's why I can easily place this delicate item on top of this one without damaging the one at the bottom. And the new one brings me to another rule. If you have an arrow on the delicate item, it means it must be placed with the arrow pointing up. You can still flip that tile to the other side, for example like this, but the arrow must point up. You may never place it like this. It must always be in the upright position. Some delicate items can also be antiques. When the truck drives off, they act as delicate items, which means they can be damaged. And then at the end of the game, they act as antiques, which means the more you have, the more victory points you score. All items have symbols. Each item has a different symbol, and these symbols represent the ownership of that item by different members of the family. When you add an item and you create a pair of identical symbols, like this one here, for example, you immediately gain one additional action. So it's like you get additional turn right away after finishing this one. However, you only get one additional action and then it's the next player's turn. So for example, when you create a pair like this and you get a bonus action, and with that action you do displacement and you have another pair, you don't receive the third action, your bonus would be wasted. Instead, you can place an item in your storage, because when you place an item in the storage or when you place an item into your truck, you only look for the pairs which are inside your truck. Items in your storage don't count. So on your subsequent turn, when you take an item from the storage and place it into your truck, now you create a pair and then you get a bonus action. Two notes here. First, you also get a bonus action from boxes because they have the same symbol. And second note, after we create one pair of the matching symbols, you have to create another pair in order to get another bonus action. So in this example, you have three symbols, which doesn't grant you additional action, but when you add the fourth symbol, the second pair, now you get the bonus action. Okay, now let's take a look at the drive and score action. When you decide to deliver the items to the new house, you will score all the items in your truck. First, you score 10 victory points simply for driving off. Then you score additional 3 victory points if there are no -1 squares visible in your truck. So in this example, that's another 3 points. Otherwise, you will simply score -1 victory point for each visible square. So currently you would lose 3 victory points. In this example, you only score 1 negative victory point, and so on. Then for each heavy item, you score 1 victory point, and then you score victory points for your delicate items. If the item is not damaged, you score the plus points. In this case, it's +1. Otherwise, you score the negative number from that tile. In this example, it's -2, so you lose 2 victory points from this damaged item. However, it's an antiques item, which means you will score additional victory points at the end of the game. So, when we have a situation like this, it would be 10 victory points for driving off, 3 victory points for no visible -1 squares, +1 victory point for the heavy item, +1 victory point for this delicate item, and -2 victory points for the broken item here. That's 13 victory points in total. Take the damage token and place it back into the supply and unload all the tiles into your personal storage. Keep that storage in your play area. You will score those tiles at the end of the game, and now your truck is empty. You can come back to the old house and start loading new items. Just before playing an action, you can play one or more of these helper cards, and that will alter that action. Each card can be only used once, and then it's discarded, it's basically removed from the game. However, at the end of the game, if you don't use the cards, if they're still in your hand, you score the indicated number of victory points at the end of the game. Now, let me talk about the effects of those cards, and we'll start with this one. There are three icons here. The icon for heavy item, for the delicate item, and for a delicate item with the indicated storage. That means when you play this card, you can completely ignore the rules for these items. For example, you can place a heavy item on top of non-heavy item, for example like this. At the same time, the delicate item will not get damaged. Or, for example, when you place it like this, you can place the delicate item with the indicated position without following that rule, so you may place it in any way you want. So again, you can ignore all these conditions at the same time. The second helper card allows you to take an item which is not available, but it sits on top of another item which is currently available. For example, this is available item, these two are not available. However, with the second helper, I can take one of these unavailable items which sit on top of the item which is already available. However, this time I have to place it using the standard placement rules, so if I placed it like this, I would damage this item, so for example I can place it like this. And with the third helper, you already know these icons. In addition to these symbols, you have another one available which allows you to overlap items in the truck. So for example, when placing this item, I could break all these rules. So for example, I can place it like this without damaging this item. And with this overlap, I could actually place it even like this. When you do, all the symbols on those covered items still count. So this symbol still counts, these victory points still count. So this is definitely the most powerful helper. When the last item from the house board is taken and placed, the round ends. Move the round marker to the next space. Take these waiting items and place them on these bottom spaces of the house board. There are 4 items in a 3 and a 4 player game and 3 items in a 2-player game. Take 3 random box tiles and place them on these green spaces with the green boxes. And then fill in all the remaining spaces as you did during setup. And after that, place the new waiting items under the board as well. However, when you prepare the game for the third round, you don't have to place any of these waiting items. There is no impact to your trucks at the end of the round, they simply remain as they are. Then the game continues with the next player in the player order. It doesn't have to be the starting player. Is the next player after the player who triggered the end of the round. At the end of the third round, the game is over. That happens, obviously, when all the items from the house board are taken and placed. Unlike in previous rounds, at the end of round 3, at the end of the game, all trucks drive off and score, regardless of number of items you have in your truck. If you have less than 10 of these -1 squares visible, you score the truck normally. So you score 10 victory points for driving off. You score -1 victory point for each visible square with this -1 symbol. So in our example, it's -9. And then you score heavy items and delicate items. However, if you have 10 or more of these -1 squares visible, you don't score the 10 victory points for driving off, but you also don't score any negative victory points from these squares. So the number of victory points for the truck itself is 0. You still score victory points for heavy items and potentially for any delicate items. So in this example, it would be 1 victory point for the heavy item, 1 victory point for the delicate item. So 4, 7, 8, 9, 10. No victory points for the truck and for the -1 squares, and there is +1 victory point for heavy item and +1 victory point for the delicate item. So this truck is now worth 2 victory points. If you still have any item remaining in your storage, you lose 2 victory points for that item and you lose that item. And then look at all the items you have delivered to the new house. Flip the boxes, green boxes, to their back side and add the victory points from those tiles. and then count the number of antiques. Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and score the victory points based on this table at the end of the rulebook. For 5 items, it's 13 victory points. Add the victory points for any unused helper cards, and then the player with the most victory points is the winner. If you exceed 50 victory points, flip the victory point marker to the other side, showing 50 plus. If you play with these keepsake cards, then all the items with these symbols have a special value for their owners, and at the end of the game, look at all these 3 categories and award additional victory points for each category. For each symbol, the player with the most items with that symbol gains additional 4 victory points. If players are tied for the most items, then all tied players score 2 victory points. Score each category separately, so here let's say blue player would score 4 victory points, then do the same with this symbol and this symbol. So that's it, that's how you play removal. If you have any questions or comments, I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. And with that, thank you for watching. You've been watching video tutorial for the game called Removal from Albi. My name is Branislav Berec and hope to see you with the next one.